Hello and welcome to the Miko Bits show, and I'm your host, Miko Bits. And today I've got an exciting episode with Jack O'Halloran, who's the CEO of SKALE, and they've got some really exciting news recently with deployment of their network. So would love to get right into it for you. So hey Jack, how are you?
Hey, Nico. Pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. Great having you here. And I guess the first big question for you is tell us about SKALE. It's a pretty exciting project.
Yeah, thank you. So excited to be here. Always love talking about blockchain and scalability. So, the SKALE network is an open source, decentralized blockchain network. And you can see my title here says CEO of SKALE. I'm actually the CEO of SKALE Labs, Inc. We created the network and the code, the initial code, and then open sourced this a while ago. So SKALE is designed to help Ethereum applications scale to hundreds of millions of users. So it's interesting in that it's built partially on the Ethereum network. So a series of smart contracts on Ethereum run the SKALE network, which is another separate set of nodes or computers that run the SKALE network. And what it does is SKALE runs many, thousands and thousands of small versions of Ethereum, and through a method of randomization and rotation and incentive structure with proof of stake, we're able to have this federated model where one developer can get access to one chain that's actually gathering pooled security from a lot of nodes. And the cool thing is that when they're running this chain, they basically just run Ethereum on the SKALE chain, and then it can speak back and forth through the Ethereum. In addition, the Ethereum network is where the SKALE token lives. It's where the engine is that orchestrates all the nodes. It's where the stake lives, where validators will be penalized if they act maliciously. And it's also where developers pay for the chain. They pay on the Ethereum network. So it's an interesting, almost rev share model in the open source decentralized world, where to use SKALE, you've got to pay Ethereum.
Yeah, that's a great and interesting hybrid model. And I guess for me, the thing that I'm kind of curious about is, it sounds like then people will pay using Ether, and then it sort of then allows them to do computation over on your side.
Yeah, and so what it is, it's open, so pretty soon anybody in the world can show up and run SKALE chain or SKALE node as a validator. Right now, there's 46 validator operators running 135 nodes with 4,000 different individuals staking into the network, okay? There's about $80 million worth of SKALE tokens locked in the network. And so if I'm a developer, let's say I have a game or a DeFi application, and I say I want a medium-sized SKALE chain, then I have to do two things. And one, I have to Ether, because for me to get my chain, I actually have to pay the Ethereum mainnet to do work to assign the resources to me. So I might have to pay like $300 to $400 equivalent in Ethereum. And then the smart contracts on the Ethereum side think, and they say, hey, SKALE nodes, you 16 out of 10,000 small increments line up here and run an Ethereum chain, a SKALE chain. And then I have to pay SKALE tokens to reserve that chain or rent it also software as a service model. So I could say, hey, I want 12 months of this size of SKALE, and in a way, like almost prepaying for AWS space instead of paying as you go. And then you pay in SKALE, and you pay it right into a really easy to use interface. It goes into this big pool of SKALE tokens that then pays all the people that run the nodes and stake in the network every month.
That's interesting. And can you tell us kind of what the current status of the network?
Yeah, so I actually have something. It's different from a lot of networks in that the network's live, but the token is not liquid. Okay.
Yeah.
And it's kind of an interesting dynamic. I think the founding team, we've been doing startups for a long time and really wanted to make sure the network was up and running and open source and decentralized and run by many different people and individuals and entities, and that it worked before the token's traded. And so the network goes through three phases. The first phase was, the foundation ran 16 nodes. It was an authority model. The software was up running. And this was following a long series of testnets. And that ran between June 30th and October 1st. And on October 1st, it switched into the first decentralized mainnet launch. And 4,000 people are staking in the network roughly, to 135 nodes run by 46 different validator orgs. And so it's live on October 25th. I think we're going to start seeing the first series of dApps join, start running scale chains. And then there'll be subsequent updates as the software that runs the scale chains gets pushed out to these nodes and gets updated.
Wow, that's amazing. Congratulations. That's imminently about to happen. So tell us a little bit about sort of what makes this different and what makes developers kind of choose this platform.
Yeah, so if you think about, if you're an Ethereum developer, I think there's three real areas that you can look for to talk about to scale your Ethereum application. One, you just go to a blockchain on a different network, a totally different network. Let's say you could run another layer one, an Ethereum killer, and you can actually bridge over. So a lot of these ETH killers are bridging over to Ethereum and saying, hey, connect to us, and we're going to make you run really fast. The issue with that is then you have to rewrite your smart contracts, you're trusting another network. And if you're an Ethereum developer, you're not really going outside of your cohort and your community and your tribe, okay? And so a lot of people don't want to do that, but you're still running on a centralized blockchain and you're getting high speeds, and that's nice. Now, the other way that's very common is you don't run a blockchain. You run software that's run by a centralized server that's run by a person or an entity. And you could run ZK, you could run rollups, you could run ZK rollups, you could run, some plasma derivative. And basically what that means is there's one server that's using mathematics and fraud proofs to try to attest that everything happens on the layer 2 is accurate. And then, and if that node goes rogue or goes malicious, then you have these human-centered mechanisms with workflows where you can't sell for 3 days or 7 days, and you can kind of rewrite the blockchain and give everyone their money back if there's a catastrophic piece of fraud or something happens. Okay.
Yeah.
And that's the second category. The third category is you use an Ethereum interoperable blockchain, and this category has a few subcategories. And traditional side chains, I think, fit in this category. And so then it's really great because it seamlessly connects. It takes 2 lines of code to set up. But the issue is that if the smaller subset of validators goes rogue, goes Byzantine, and tries to take money from the network, then you can lose your money, okay? And so what you want is a lot of nodes that have a lot of stake to lose, and protects more money protecting each application. So scale brings to the table this dynamic where, hey, there could be thousands of nodes, and at any given time I'm assigned a random subset, they're rotated, and they all have a lot of money to lose. Right now at launch price, each node has 600,000 USD backing it up. We're staking in the network to protect it, and we hope to see that number rise and the number of nodes rise, and then every small, we don't even call them side chains, they're really like an elastic shard or an elastic side chain, but we're even moving away from that because there's a lot of negative connotations with side chains. But that's the advantage, why I think that's where we see product market fit, and where we're trying to support Ethereum developers is they can still use Ethereum. They don't give up a lot of the security properties that they typically have to give up with the advantage of having a sidechain.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So tell us a bit more about killer applications, right? Every great platform kind of has these great applications. I know that it's only like a few weeks before you're going to start seeing these applications on your network. So I'd love to kind of understand, like, what do you think are the killer applications for Scale?
Yes, I love talking about this. I'm excited to talk about it. Also, Miko, you know so much about product market fit, and even my first company back, I think we met in 2008, and you were already giving me tremendous advice. I'm excited to hear what you have to say too. So when I think of killer applications, I go back to this reason around why a blockchain. So if you're going to pay for something, not to run on one server, but to be replicated on many, many servers, so that it's accurate and it's true. You need decentralization. You want trustlessness. You want programmable money that works not just in programmable money that runs on a centralized server, Like, what are those reasons why I would need that? And one of the things I get most excited about is just disruptive business models. So, and this is where smart contracts come into play. We can actually design systems that have sets of rules that are governed by code that's open source, we all can look at and see. So DeFi is really successful right now. It's booming because groups of people are saying, hey, we're removing the bank. We're removing the other people that extracted value. We're removing the market makers and the Binances and the Coinbases, and we're going to go trade tokens, and we're going to provide our own tokens as opposed to, market makers. And we have these automated market makers now. And so it's really awesome to see that happen. But the issue is that we're still just trading crypto on crypto, okay? And so there's only so much growth. What I get excited about beyond this is when we go to other business models, like where we could replace middlemen who are charging ad revenue, or or selling your data, or taking a bigger rate than they should in a marketplace environment. And gaming's an area where that's really critical. And there's also this element of NFTs, but just literally displacing the middleman who's extracting all the money and sharing it to the users and giving governments some power to the users. That's exciting. I get excited about consumer applications and see a lot of really interesting consumer applications coming, especially marketplace dynamics. And the other area I think that's least talked about, that has the most, I think, some of the most upside over the next 5 years, is SMB B2B disruption. So people like to talk about enterprise and these big companies using blockchains, and in this like there's a proof of authority where there's 10 or 15 people running nodes, and it's kind of like, why don't they just run a server? Okay, that's not there's use cases that are really interesting, but what gets me excited is when you could take 10,000 or 20,000 or 50,000 small to medium-sized businesses and bring them services in open source kind of cooperative community manner, and displace these big enterprise companies that sell them software and really have created such a monopoly that these small companies just get extorted every month, right? And there's many, many use cases where that comes together. Now, I think we're further away. I think we're going to see DeFi and gaming have the biggest hits in the short term, but there's a lot of other exciting areas. I'd love to hear your thoughts too, Nico.
Yeah, so for me, I have two things that I think a lot about. Like, one of them is, I think exactly what you're describing, which is, I think that if you look at DeFi and gaming, and as a result, things like, NFT and art and all of these things, like one of the things that you kind of start to notice is that there's a circular self-referentiality, right? That there's a kind of a cloister or smaller group of people that are all kind of doing these activities together, right? But that it doesn't seem to create this kind of larger scale impact, right? So like, I think Vitalik was talking quite a while back about kind of like, we create this like market cap value, but how many, unbanked have we banked, or these types of questions, right? So the questions that Vitalik is pushing on is kind of, what are the potential real applications, right? So I think the reason why I'm poking here is because I think what is being built in DeFi is definitely a financial system, right? But if you want to talk about finance, right? Finance is a verb, right? And what does the verb finance? I mean, it's also a noun, but what does the verb mean? The verb means basically to supply money to something, to projects or programs or companies or endeavors, right? And so the thing that's really interesting is, what are we financing, right? And so the thing that's really funny about DeFi is it's like, well, DeFi, it finances more DeFi, right? And so the thing that's really becomes interesting, I think, in the long run becomes kind of, how does this end up impacting kind of the world, in a obviously, like, it is and it also isn't the world. But I guess
it's like in Excel, we've hit this point where it says you have a circular reference. Reference does not compute. And when, and it's almost like a game of musical chairs where people are playing and whoever's left standing last, like, doesn't get liquidity, right? And that's, I actually think these exercises where they add value, immediate value within a smaller group of people. But what we're doing, we're almost in spring training for the real world. We're also learning how to govern systems with open source contracts, right? We're learning how to, handle multi-sigs and these environments until we have on-chain voting that will update the rules of the contract. So it's cool to see this stuff come together, but it's almost, to me, it feels a little bit like practice. And we need to play so that we can fund loans for people in developing countries with, group efforts that actually is a monetary win for the people funding the loans instead of the middleman. We need to fund construction loans or whatever, like the models, when you remove the brick and mortar of banks and you have really strong financial rails, there are a lot of things you can do. And I don't think we're going to see people funding big $1 million homes in the short term, because that's not the low-hanging fruit. I think smaller loans with high frequency, where smart contracts come into play, and not the few, but the many can provide support to many, is where things get really interesting.
Yeah, I like the comment about SMB. I mean, one of the things that's so interesting is that the watchword that pops up for me in that context is kind of coordination, right? Because the thing that's so interesting when you look at kind of corporations and society is that, like, when you look at kind of this concept of disaggregation, right? And so, like, at some point, like, every individual human kind of becomes a corporation, and everybody kind of works in this sort of freelancing mode, people are all kind of interacting and, we're working in this kind of like, so I think in an environment like that, coordination becomes super interesting and important, right? So, I think we start to see applications that focus on that, and I think in a way the world of open source is already preparing us for, this type of stuff, because open source is self-organizing, and it's kind of amazing.
I'll give you my big kind of hairy, crazy idea that I hope someone does. So Force.com, which is the Salesforce CRM backend database backbone. This is the backbone that marketing automation and customer data and sales tools, sales productivity, sales efficiency, et cetera. All of these tools that most people who aren't in engineering or product use every day. It always hits Salesforce, and Salesforce takes a 15 or 30% rake off each of the applications. The users pay crazy fees, and you're just funding the machine, right?
Yeah.
What if we had a fully open source, just Force.com backend, and had some interesting governance models on how those are upgraded, and then actually let people like buy in and have a more free-flowing marketplace without a middleman for buying your marketing automation tools, buying your lead tracking tools, your et cetera. You think about the whole suite of products that runs on Salesforce, because I'll tell you, I love Salesforce as a company. I had a lot of good experience working at them at like the higher levels, but I know that there are a lot of small to medium businesses that are hurting, that are just kind of like beat up, and they're just, they just are. It's like, because there's a profit maximization factor happening. If it's a co-op and there's a token incentive that's driving that sort of coordination and governance and profit sharing and just cost savings, then I think we get a completely different ballgame. We might be 5-10 years out to see real impact there, but that's where I see like this path heading, is even big industries like that starting to get turned around from a business model perspective and incentivization perspective.
Yeah, I'm very excited about the way you're talking about this, which is kind of like more in an oblique way rather than really talking about very kind of specific things. Because the two things that I'm getting out of your view are, one of which is that this idea, like what's happening, we saw in DeFi with things like SushiSwap, is this kind of opportunity to sort of weaponize the network effects, right? So that you can create kind of a tokenization that drives sort of the network effect and the value, right? So you can actually take a network effect and you can commercialize it, right? So the thing that's so interesting about the killer applications for that are, the killer applications are inclusion, right? So in a sense, you're really, when you say the word you said is like co-ops, right? So like, I can go down to REI, my local camping equipment provider, and it's a co-op, right? And I get a rebate from them at the end of the year, because they take their profit and drive it back to their customers, And so the thing that's so interesting about these models is that right now the network effects are all being swallowed into these kind of big tech companies, right? So the question becomes like, what happens when these network effects are distributed in the form of like, I don't want to dare say like dividends or anything that might be kind of deemed to be a financial security, but like are somehow contributed, the value is given back to the users and the community, much in the way that Bitcoin is like the bank of the internet that's owned by the users, right? And that the users are the beneficiaries of any quote unquote profits. So if there are profits, whatever those are, then it's distributed among the owners pro rata, right? Like, and obviously like there are wealth inequality issues in Bitcoin and in everything, but like, it's still like the idea that there's a pro rata distribution of the incentives is a way to drive additional disruption. But I think the other thing that I wanted to throw on top of what you're saying is that when you talk about something like Salesforce as a community platform, not Salesforce itself, but like something that performs that exact function, right? I think what you're really talking about is network effect, the economic network effect coupled with plain old open source software, right? Which is an inevitability, right? Like open source software is an inevitability, right? So the question then becomes like, if you put these two components together, then what you're talking about is something that could potentially happen pretty fast, right? Because, because open source is like a huge powerhouse. But if you actually, the thing that's been so true historically is that open source has been kind of largely lacking in massive economic incentive. Right? Like, obviously, people have done well with open source software. A number of my friends have kind of gone on to do great open source companies, sold them for, even in some cases, billions of dollars. But like, at the end of the day, it's a little different from the blockchain space. Yeah. Well, that's been great. And it's been a good conversation about killer applications.
And hey, one other quick thing to add to this that I think is like, just to show people how far away we are. Because you and I, we can have these like big topic conversations that people are like, okay, those guys are like great, they're really thinking about the future, but come on, let's get out of sci-fi. So let me give you an example. So let's say a group of people wrote open source software that runs the functionality of Amazon. That and not specifically, but what Amazon does for blockchain.
Yep.
And it can do storage, it can run compute. It can do other things like, have transactions run. It's really a database. And the people that run the database is whoever, as long as you just show up, you run a server, and you keep the software to the latest version, and you get enough people to fund the server, and so that it has some skin in the game to act well. And then this software just runs itself, and it pays the people that run the servers. People who want to buy it have to pay the system. And this piece of software, this token's running the thing. And then let's say people are like, hey, it shouldn't cost so much, you're charging so much. And then they vote with the software.
Yep.
The token, they're like, I'll vote. And it changes. I mean, like that's what SKALE is, okay? Like we're already doing this. Well, there's other people do, right?
Well, and to add to that, like there are other people doing this, right? Like for example, if you look at another project that will launch fairly soon is Alcoin, right? And if you look at their space race, they're already up to kind of petascale storage, and exabyte scale storage is coming, right? I think that's inevitable. So like, a lot of what they're doing is kind of S3, kind of part of AWS, right? But if you look at other, obviously you have a compute service, Ethereum has a compute service, right? So like that's part of like, what they call like EC2 and the Elastic Compute Cloud, But the thing that's funny is if you look at like, I just had Origin Protocol on the show, and they were talking about basically they have like a Shopify, right? Like they're actually running decentralized Shopify where like, e-commerce merchants can just use. So I guess the point I'm making is that like, you're absolutely right. Like we really are not that far away. Now, the thing that's amazing is how long the blockchain has gone without having a Filecoin. It's years, right? So I mean, we've been doing without one for quite a long time, and we've been doing crazy things like IPFS and whatnot. But like, without truly an incentivized storage layer, it doesn't. It can't be made commercial.
By the way, you can run storage in every SKALE chain too. I don't know if I told you that.
Cool.
There's a file storage component now. The strengths of Filecoin and like a coordinated IPFS are different because And in Arweave, right, you're storing massive amounts of data for a long period of time. But in Scale, you can run front ends, you can run all the basic storage requirements that aren't about, hoarding massive amounts of data. And it just shows you like these areas are deep and complex, and it's easy right now because the industry is in these nascent days to just like kind of lump them in these easy categories. But you know how Miko, you enterprise software incredibly well. Like Gartner's got a mile deep for every inch wide in the enterprise space. And frankly, that's why I'm working in blockchain and in crypto, because I just see the growth.
Yeah, and one of the beautiful things about this kind of like open source world is that there's so much of an inherent driver and center of gravity around kind of standards, protocol standards, whether they're de facto or not. Like, the people love to see standardized solutions, right? And the thing that's so great about open source is that, you can always just kind of fork and if you have value to add, you can just kind of add the value on top of that. So I just think that there's a lot of great reasons to be optimistic. So I think it's an exciting topic. So one of the things that I'm really interested in is that everybody knows that Ethereum scalability is, problematic. People are paying high gas fees, $100 transactions plus, and it's come down a little bit recently. But I think that's really just a function of there being a lull in some of these kind of like DeFi application things. But people do know long term that mass adoption is going to be gated by performance, right? But what I do see like Vitalik today was kind of talking about things like, optimistic rollup, ZK rollup. He was talking about plasma. He was talking, and he really kind of challenged the community by saying that, like, hey, if you have a performance intensive application, you should get onto layer 2, So he's definitely been aggressive about promoting that, and I think obviously there's other kind of novel solutions coming. Obviously, we're looking at things like a lot of proof of stake chains, things like substrate parity, kind of Polkadot, and then we're seeing the other side of like IBC, Cosmos, Tendermint, and then beyond. Right? We're seeing things like Solana, with their whole approach, and of course there's like quite a few others. So I guess I'm curious, kind of like, to get your perspective on maybe specific things, where you see them playing, because ultimately, like, that it all relates to kind of segments and different choices.
Yeah. And first off, I just want to say it's amazing to see the level of talent and effort and and techniques and people that are all trying to solve this problem. It's been really fun. During Crypto Winter, well, we've been working on this since 2017, as of many other people. When it was hot in 2017 and 2018, guess what? Everyone was at every event. And, you really saw the people who stuck it out. And so it's just fun to see where we are now. And so what I would say is, the way I mentioned this earlier, but there's different ways of, I guess you could say, like, kind of like, solving the problem. There's different mousetraps. And one that, Vitalik has been talking a lot of people are really software that are blockchains. So you're trying to use a fraud proof or different techniques that run on a server combined with workflows.
Yep.
To make it so to just really ensure no one can steal. And we have the opportunity to implement those in scale chains, but the reason why we haven't is, somebody has to run a centralized piece of software. And so it's like, there's a lot of great companies that are funded, they're venture backed, meaning venture capitalists gave them money in return for equity. And at some point, these companies have to really start producing a lot of revenue and get fired.
Yeah.
And so, like, I think a lot of people aren't really thinking the business implications. Like, well, what if this small team gets used by a lot of people? Then Coinbase runs all of layer 2 for Ethereum, or Amazon or Microsoft. And so I'm just, I see these things happening, and it's like, okay, that's because these aren't blockchains. These are for-profit software, or they just want to open source it. Anybody can run a server, but then they're taking on the liability of running the software, the legal liability, financial liability, but the techniques and the technology is really amazing. So I don't want to take anything away But we aren't employing those or putting those into scale chains now because of business issues. And just doesn't really fit what we hear people need when they're running decentralized applications. Now, then I think, earlier I talked about other blockchains that aren't on Ethereum or Ethereum interoperable. And then, Ethereum interoperable blockchains and the different types of side chains where there's a pure side chain that's just a fixed set of validators and hey, there's 16 nodes there and it's really clear who runs them. And you know what, at any given time, 2/3 of them could just rewrite the ledger and take money. Then there's this kind of pooled security model like SKALE that has, you get your own sub chain. And what I would also say is you go to Polkadot, you look at Cosmos, they're doing the same thing. What it is, it's application-specific blockchains. Every dApp or company, entity, whomever can get their own blockchain.
Yeah.
And I think that's the architecture design of the future. And then it's really like who has, who's going to win? Is it going to be SKALE? Will it be Polkadot? Will it be Cosmos? Now, the advantage SKALE has is SKALE's really in the Ethereum community, and it's run by the Ethereum network, and it runs Ethereum. If you run on these other platforms, you're kind of saying, hey, I'm not in the community. I'll try to win some business to get those people to bridge over to my chains. But it's really fundamentally different in terms of how the coding comes together.
Well, I think it sounds like, sorry to interrupt, but it sounds like there's two, obviously one of the elements of interoperability is kind of the whole EVM thing, right? So, if you look at Solidity and look at the familiarity of the programming environment and all of that, like that's an issue. But the thing that's really interesting about what you're describing is you're describing kind of like the rest of the tool chain as well, right? Because it feels like, for example, like, if you can interface to it through the Ethereum, mainnet, then you're talking about things like MetaMask, and you're talking about, just familiar that.
Yeah, and wallets and all these things that if you're on an entirely different network, you need a different wallet to store your tokens. You need, and you need API-based wallets. How do you use them within applications? You need, there's so many things in the Ethereum ecosystem that it would take, a brand new blockchain, like hundreds of millions of dollars to build up the entire suite. Now, and so, hey, I don't want to say that I actually personally really like a lot of the people that work in these other networks that aren't in Ethereum, and I appreciate what you're doing, and I kind of feel like the rising water lifts all the boats. And I also think that there's so much green space out there that you may even see someone like Solana go and just be really successful in a certain category. You might see, a Near go be really successful in a certain category, or Polkadot or Cosmos or these others, right? And, but we're trying to take this macro approach of where's the big market going? What's the Amazon? Amazon isn't successful in category. They're successful everywhere, right? Or Google Cloud, these other platforms. But yeah, so it's interesting to see how it's coming together and kind of connecting back to what I was saying earlier. You have other, people who don't believe in application-specific blockchains, but they're separate blockchain networks, and that's where you get a Solana or Near, where it's one massively scalable blockchain. I guess there's shards in the Near program, but no shards in Solana. And so there's all these smart people trying to solve the puzzle, and we're just like,
and it's complicated, right? Because there's actually a plethora of these, right? Like there's the Algorand of the world, there's sort of Oasis, it's kind of quite different actually. It's a different kind of mindset entirely because it has to do with data privacy. But obviously there's other kind of more compute-centric chains, like I think Definity is talking about getting ready to launch after a long time. There's obviously Avalanche and all of its kind of cousins and its novel consensus, and then you kind of see even more novel consensus like space-time consensus, so even outside of POS and EPOS. But there, if you just look at proof of stake, there's a whole bunch, right? So it's a kind of dizzying world of alternates, right? And the thing that's so funny is even a completely alien kind of chain can come up with a bridging protocol and start to kind of try to get people to cross over.
But I'll tell you, it's our bet, our product market fit bet a long time ago. We're like, hey, like I bet this is going to happen in a few years. We just believed in the Ethereum ecosystem, the amount of developer traction, and also the growth of an evolution of Solidity. And Solidity 6 is just launching, and there's many improvements, right? And Stan, my co-founder, CTO, was working on the Java virtual machine. And let me tell you, like, this was in the late 90s. All these, he was a physicist and a researcher at Stanford, and a lot of people like him got recruited to go build the Java virtual machine. And you know what? That code base is very different now than it was then. And Stan saw Solidity and fell in love with it, and so did our whole engineering team. And then in the suite and ecosystem around it, we said, hey, let's give people what they want. And there's this white center of people that build dApps, and they build on Ethereum. And outside of that, people are having to poach other entrepreneurs and say, hey, have you ever thought about blockchain? And right now, there's over 60 dApps building on Scale in the Scale Innovator program. And there's probably 100 in the pipeline. And we're glad we now have, I think the core team and, surrounding community has more time to go. And now the network's up and running to go give more love and support, attention, and like onboarding help to all these others. But Ethereum's rocking, and I'm excited to see the growth there, and also excited about the other networks. And there's some cool stuff being built. And
it's so fascinating. It's so fascinating to me, right? Because if you look at all of these things, right, like, it's likely that we're going to see kind of like WASM and EWASM kind of through the Solidity substrate kind of community, right? And then we're also seeing emergence, like if you want to program Solana, you're pretty much Rust-based, and like people are kind of opting for these kind of novel models, right? Like, I mean, obviously you can program in many languages on something like Tezos, but like originally it was kind of things like OCaml with formal verification, so this stuff is starting to get figured out. Like, one of the projects that my fund supports is Agoric, and they actually are doing, kind of a classic Cosmos Tendermint chain with like a JavaScript, VM type of approach. Mm-hmm. There's a diversity of programmers. I do think that there are lots of polyglot programmers, but I do think some of them will want to stay in their tool chain, and that'll create kind of these weird, novel, I think sub ecosystem. So it's definitely different strokes for different folks.
And I think the positive thing that we're seeing is people who just want to come shill a white paper and not write any code, and like they don't want to have good lockups on their team or their investors. Like, there's no room for them anymore. That's right. Now that's kind of, we're seeing some of that crowd go and like launch DeFi primitives over a weekend and have really aggressive early yield farming, but and that that sub industry is maturing and learning. But the people that are here playing and kind of made it through the gauntlet, I think we're going to start really seeing a fight now that these networks are coming live to really get the engineering talent to build on their platform.
Yep.
And I think if you get interested in business competition and like chess like I do, it's going to be a fun 2 years to observe what happens.
Well, especially, the part that I really obsess about the most, which is sort of developers, to summarize Steve Ballmer. Yeah, that's great. So, this is really, I think, a part of a long multi-year journey. So, I think I would love to kind of get your perspective on kind of where are we? Where are we with DeFi? Mm-hmm. Where are we with scalability? Tell me about this, and in the context of like history of technology and anything else.
Yeah. I have to say, and by the way, I remember Miko speaking on stage a few years ago and saying like, it's this Cambrian era where we just have all these life forms growing. And guess what? There's going to be a cooling, and there's not going to. But the ones that survive will flourish and be incredibly successful. And actually, I think that's still very accurate. Like, we're getting through that phase, and I think you called it out really well when you said that, and it's happening. So I remember I was at Good Technology. This is 2005. Almost every single enterprise, I think 95 of the Fortune 100 and 9 of the Fortune 10 and many, many other companies all use Good for mobile email.
Yep.
Okay. And then Good tried to say, hey, we're a mobile computing company, which was smart, right? Because they knew that when mobile got to the next level, mobile would become a compute platform and all the things we can do here with our iPhones and our other tools. And it's a new frontier. And so here we were like, hey, let's launch an application platform. You know what? Nobody really used these applications and no one built on the platform, even though all the users were there, because we were still in 2G. We had horrible battery life. We had horrible compute power in the phone. We had no storage.
Infrastructure.
It was infrastructure. And so there's a societal element. There's this like matrix of societal acceptance, technical readiness, right? And finally, the technical readiness is here. Societal acceptance is starting to inch here, and the normies still think crypto's weird, so I think that's lagging a little. But we're getting into this era where the infrastructure will be in place and societal readiness. And all the things we do now on mobile, we societally weren't ready for that 10 years ago, but it started happening, and then we hit the new curve. So I think we're a year or two out from that need as these two things come together.
Yeah. Let me throw out one example that might be easier for kind of the young kids, which is I think one of the most famous pitches, and I think Jason Calacanis, whose book Angel I really recommend actually, it kind of spotlights this a lot. Is he was one of the early angel investors in Uber, right? So I think when you're talking about kind of social readiness, a combination of the availability of the technology kind of in a state of sufficiency, right? And the sufficiency of the technology matters a lot, right? So for example, like you could be like, oh yeah, we're going to create this ride sharing application, and we're going to do it on a Nokia Symbian phone, or we're going to do it on like a, text messages on your dumb phone, or that's not going to happen, right? But the thing that was so funny about Uber is that they pitched so many VCs, and very similar to Airbnb, by the way, they got kicked out of every VC meeting, right? Because people were like, you're stupid. Nobody's going to jump in your car, and they'd be too scared.
Stranger's car? Are you kidding me?
People to be too scared. Stranger's car, stranger's house, like random people jumping in your house. They just didn't understand what some people call the sharing economy, which I kind of call actually the extraction economy, right? I have a darker view, which is that, why are people quote unquote sharing? It's like, well, it's not sharing. It's just that they don't have much left, right? They have to extract their own attention by driving cars, and they have to kind of make the maximum value out of the rooms they have in their house, and it's like they're getting squeezed. The only thing they can do is maybe turn around and try to squeeze value out of things they have, like a car or a house.
Yeah. And by the way, can't you wait for the ownership economy when people pay for Uber rides? They're not Uber, and all the fees are paid in a cryptocurrency that's run by decentralized open source software, and it costs 15% less a ride, and riders get paid 15% more.
Yeah, absolutely. Disintermediation, right? Like ultimately the idea of like Uber and Lyft, they are these massive rent-seeking intermediaries. So like, if the problem is one of coordination, then open source software should be able to fix that with incentives, proper incentives. So
exactly.
Yeah, I'm definitely with you on that. So I like that. Just to give you kind of the, thanks for the shout out. Like the Cambrian explosion thing, I cribbed from Alex Mashinsky from Celsius a long while back. But I do think the thing that's fascinating about these choke points in evolution, there was a choke point in evolution where the human species, I think, came down to something like 2,000 breeding pairs. And this is kind of a bottleneck, right? And it was basically like, oh, that's really borderline extinction. But it turns out it's like, well, but it didn't happen, right? So it turns out that like those 2,000 were basically the progenitors of all. Those are our great grandparents. Like those are our ancestors, right? All of our ancestors are just those small number of people. But what I mean by that is that like what we're seeing in DeFi that I think is fascinating is we're seeing these really atomic layer financial services like lending, and we're seeing things, I think insurance is definitely become a thing. Things like AMM, so, swaps and exchange are definitely a thing, so we're just starting to see these highly conserved, fundamental, utility functions that are being formed. And, obviously things like Oracle, and on top of Oracle, things like derivatives, and so, this is amazing, right? We're seeing these super conserved chunks of DNA, that I think all future organisms will benefit from at some level. So yeah, I like the mindset.
Yeah, totally agree. It's I think we're close, and I kind of think it's like water going down the hill. It always finds its way to the bottom, and sometimes it gets pulled up, and it just needs to keep accumulating more and more to get more pressure and occupy the space, and then it starts coming down again. When you think about sharing incentives, you go interview 100 Uber drivers. I think most of them will be like, hey, I'm really glad this exists, but like, I'm thankful that I can be my own boss. But I think almost every single one of them say, I wish I got paid more. I wish I had more control over the governance of how this works and how I get paid and, what the rules are. And so when you have that type of pain, the only way you beat those network effects is by giving, it's not by creating better software, but by changing incentives and creating network effects with tokens and open source software. So it's coming, but we just have to be a little patient. At least we're almost done with the scaling issue. If you look at all the things launching now,
yeah,
there are a lot of options for people to figure out how to lower costs and increase user experience.
Well, it's astonishing, right? Because when you go all the way back to the birth of Ethereum and you read the white paper, right, it's sort of like world computer, right? And so that's that's a big, tall order, right? It's like, wow, you guys, you want to build a world computer, I think the closest centralized analog to it is like AWS, right? And Microsoft Azure or Google Cloud or whatever, but these are all just they're centralized world computers is what they are. And, so we just want to make a different one, but I think, it's taking a lot of designers to get there, right? Because obviously one of the things that's promising about your project is that, Ethereum 2, doesn't even have a programming model. They know that they're sharding, and they know that sharding impacts composability, and so they know these things, and they're just kind of thinking about it. They're just thinking about okay, phase 0 is close to being up. We're going to have phase 0 imminently, right? But then the question is, okay, that's just staking. Well, how do you program ETH2? You don't, right? Yeah, that's the thing yet. It will be. We will program that.
We'll get there.
Yeah, and Vitalik is taking the time being, get on layer 2 or get on something that doesn't tax the mainnet, because let
me tell you too, this is the case for Scale, and it's designed to work with ETH2. We need ETH2 for Scale to also grow the way we want it to grow, but Scale's trying to give application-specific blockchains to developers. And so if I have an email application and you have a social media application, all of a sudden something starts trending, it doesn't cost my users more money to send an email, right? And the emails don't get slower. And that's what happens when you have a shared backend for compute. And so that's why you see, Cosmos, Polkadot, and Avalanche, and Scale's been doing this since the very beginning. And the first designs in 2017, it was, let's give application-specific backends, and then let's settle back to the layer for the final source of truth, the ultimate global computer. And then let's have global computer sets that give people the access point to it. And it's just a more efficient model, I think. And so I'm excited for you too. And we'll get there. I mean, it's slow rowing, but this is a decentralized ship. So.
Well, and I think ETH2 is definitely kind of has that in mind, and I think it's all the battle scars, right? Because I think we all remember the days when kind of CryptoKitties was going, vertical or going asymptotic, and then it was kind of in the middle of the kind of ICO hype craze kind of nonsense, and the network basically just stopped. It was, it didn't stop, but it just really started grinding, and people were just like, what even is this? This doesn't make any sense, and so I totally get what you're saying, right? Which is the thing that's so amazing about what's happening. The thing that I think is exciting about the whole phenomenon, though, is that at core we're really just thinking about trust. And I think what's happened recently in DeFi that's so beautiful is that we're now more fluidly playing with the slider, right? Because it turns out that lack of trust is very expensive, right? And so, how expensive is lack of trust? Well, let's build a world computer with very little trust. And it turns out that it's kind of doing 7 transactions a second or so, right? That's how expensive it is, right? And it turns out that some transactions on there will cost you $100. So it's kind of like, oh, I see. So not trusting anyone costs you a lot of money, right? And it's kind of like, if you want to play with the slider, right? The thing that's so comical about the slider is it's not like, oh, I don't trust anyone, so it's super expensive, right? So in order for it to come super cheap, I need to trust every single no, that's not how it works. If I can trust one person, I can get a zillion transactions a second because that person's running my Oracle database or whatever, right? Like if I can just trust that one person, then I'm like super good, right? But I think today people are playing and so the thing that's beautiful about this recent expansion is the creativity, the playfulness, and that there are a variety of solutions, and you were a very decentralized solution, and there's other solutions that are just less decentralized, and it's sort of like, all right, if you want to, like that could work, it just depends on what you're trying to do.
It does, and if it works for your use case, great. And if you haven't thought through all the issues, and hey, there's trade-offs everywhere, right? And in Scale Network, you've got trust another set of node operators and validators, and they're the same ones that are all running E2. That's a positive thing, but still, trust isn't free. You are putting trustlessness somewhere else, then just a cost of doing more research, etc. And it's kind of it's a really interesting point that trustlessness is not free, and DeFi, the thing, I think all of us, there's a lot of people that really love DeFi and believe it's taking out banks and it's the next wave, and I think it's growing and I'm excited about it. But I also think that a lot of it is like circular reference.
Sure.
But it's good stuff because we're exercising, we're in spring training, and we've got to learn how to use smart contracts, how to do governance, and use these financial primitives that will live in the big, the future of DeFi.
Yeah, I love the metaphor. Here in COVID, I'm on my treadmill a lot. I got one of those Peloton bike type of things, and it's the idea that it's circular, but at the same time, it's contributing to your fitness, right? So it's not like you shouldn't do those things. It's we're just all getting into shape. We're all getting suited up for the big game.
And it's a societal piece. It's a piece of the societal acceptance curve. I think it's a play bigger that has this chart where it's like technical readiness, societal acceptance, and the closer you are to the middle, the more it's owned by big companies. The further away you are, the more speculative it is. And then there's a sweet spot of disruption where you want to be in.
That's cool. That's very cool. But the thing that's so funny is that we're going to knock that on its side, right? Because I think you just have to replace big companies with big DAOs, and then it'll all be owned in quotes by big DAOs, right?
I think so. And then we'll have new problems, and then we'll have whales that aren't treating the other people fair enough, and we'll have all this quadratic voting and stuff, but it'll be better than the GAFA, the Google, Apple, Facebook.
Well, I think the thing that open source has provably been magnificent at is commoditizing infrastructure, right? And commoditizing infrastructure that's fairly unchanging and stable, and stuff that's kind of really topsy-turvy and stuff. It'll take a while to shake that stuff out. Because if you, take a look at Bitcoin, right? One of the beauties of Bitcoin is Bitcoin, right? It's I'm so grateful that Bitcoin is Bitcoin. I'm not there's zero people running around in Bitcoin improvement proposal saying, I would like to improve Bitcoin by turning it into Ethereum, or I would like to improve Bitcoin by, it's no, I don't want it to do that. They just want it to do what it's always done. And obviously there's things we want it to use Tor 3, or we want it to, it to evolve with the times. but the actual thing it's doing, we don't want to mess with. It's like, oh, I'm going to improve it by making 42 million coins. It's like, no, nobody wants that, right? So I think the tone I'm trying to set is that, like, obviously there are things that will kind of become lasting and durable infrastructure utilities as a function of just being so stable. Like something like Filecoin or storage is just, storage is going to be a pretty stable concept, right? Like, I want to store this, I want it back, here's a little money. Like that's not going to be topsy-turvy.
Yeah. And the thing that when I think about money, Bitcoin to me, and by the way, I've been a huge advocate of Bitcoin since 2013 and like 2011. I remember I lived in Palo Alto. I was living in San Francisco then, but all my Palo Alto friends were all sending the white paper around, and hey, really been a huge supporter of Bitcoin. I've never sold any Bitcoin. It's like, don't sell your Bitcoins. Hold on to them.
Good advice.
And it reminds me, Bitcoin is with mobile. He's sending an emails and messaging, like to send a message. That's the number one thing to do on a mobile device. But now there's a lot of things you can do, and it doesn't make sending a message less valuable. Okay.
Yeah.
And so I think I'm not a maximalist because I actually just see the huge set of value and also the value in not changing Bitcoin. It's like not improving it. It's value because it's stable.
Yeah. Bitcoin is the perfect Bitcoin. Like it's
a perfect Bitcoin. Let's not mess with it. Let's maybe tweak it iteratively, but let's make really slow changes. And then for other utilities and other use cases, then we create new things. And it doesn't mean this category is like going to go one way or another. And I think that's kind of like junior varsity thinking of people who are like, it's Bitcoin or nothing. It's like, no, guys, this is all like, we're all on the same team.
Yeah. And I feel like people that demand that there be a all singing, all dancing kind of cryptocurrency that kind of behaves like the dollar. Like the dollar doesn't even behave like the dollar. Like the dollar isn't, there's no single software package called the dollar. Like it doesn't exist. So, I mean, there's plenty of things pegged to the dollar, including dollars, by the way. Like dollar is pegged to the dollar, right? So I'm what I mean is the physical abstraction, right, is quote unquote pegged to the dollar, right? So the point I'm trying to make is there will be like utilities that peg to Bitcoin and that are not Bitcoins or whatever, but like, I think that at the end of the day, like the ultimate thing we have to kind of like reason about are like what's going to become open source infrastructure, and therefore kind of in some ways just become eternal, right? Because that's the thing that's beautiful about open source is that it's almost like immortality, right? Open source becomes, and open source is almost the ultimate kind of pavement, right? Because it's like, Linux, it's like, oh, well, it's an operating system, and that's great, right? So, I think we want to have better and better and better infrastructure. We want it to be cheaper and faster. We want it to be as free as possible. And that's I think what open source has always been good at.
Yeah. Exciting times.
Fantastic. Well, I really appreciate this. And it's been a really fun conversation. And, come on back anytime.
Yeah. Hey, always a pleasure. Even just chatting one-on-one. Now we get to chat one-on-one to many. It's a good time always, Nico.
Appreciate it. Thanks so much. Okay, bye.